Okay, so I flipped my bag. Now, you guys might know this on yours, but notice this. I feel like my lining keeps popping out. So do you guys remember that notebook sample we did, the understitch? If you notice in step number 21, it says understitch, lining as far as possible. And understitch is in bold, it's all uppercase. So that's your signal to go to the glossary at the front of the patterns and read what understitching is. But you guys might not be able to do it, or might not have to do it because that was a notebook sample, right? So maybe you remember how to do it. But again, understitch, it's not a top stitch, so we're not going to see any stitching on the outer part of our bag, but you will see a stitching on the inside, hence the term understitch. And you just kind of have to remember how to do that. So it might be easier if you have a bigger hole right here, and you are going to basically, essentially, sew your seam allowance to your lining. Okay, so I recommend putting in pins all the way around. So, because you don't want your lining to kind of, curl or anything. You really want it nice and flat. And then take it to the sewing machine and sew maybe a 1/4 inch away from the seam, and it should catch all of your seam allowance. You want to be careful not to catch the bottom part of your lining, so that's going to be a little tricky. Okay, so I'm at the sewing machine. Where's the little hole? Okay, and I just want to make sure when I'm sewing it, I'm sewing my seam allowance. I'm not sewing the wrong part of the lining, just my seam allowance, and sewing it to the lining. But it's just so hard because there's so many bottom layers. I don't want to accidentally sew together. So I'm trying to get it in this machine here. Okay. And I'm just going to line up my presser foot against the seam. Make sure it's nice and flat. Great. There we go. Got the pin. And then hopefully on this side again, I don't have like the bottom of the bag or anything funny. Should just be the seam allowance from the pink fabric and my lining here. Now I'll back stitch. Take out my pin. And again, it says to go as far as possible. I have seen some students go the whole entire way. If you can pull it off, do it. Okay, so here's my understitch for part of it. Again, if you can go all the way around, go for it. Just try to do as much as you can. And then when you're done, your lining, of course, should go back in your bag. And by having that understitch, it should hopefully make it kind of now more naturally want to fall in instead of how before it was coming out. Okay, so don't skip that step. It's important.